All right, welcome back to the channel. Errol Spence Jr., according to these numbers that I see, proved that he is the bigger star than Canelo Alvarez over the last couple years, beats him in ticket sales and viewership, and those are the numbers that count. So people claiming that Canelo Alvarez is the face of boxing, you're not going to like this video because it's just not true. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. So, saw an article that came out of the Boxing Insider, and it was illustrative of something that I have been explaining to people and pointing out to people for at least the last year. Canelo Alvarez is by many people considered to be the biggest name in boxing. Other people that are included in that list are guys like Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury, and you have certain people like Deontay Wilder and Errol Spence Jr. who just really get overlooked in those conversations despite having had better numbers than everybody else. And let's go through this because there were several fights since the pandemic. Now, the pandemic that we've been going through has been going on for at least a year, right? So we now have a whole year of everybody having fought, right? Errol Spence Jr. fought, Canelo Alvarez fought. Tyson Fury wasn't able to fight because, you know, it is what it is. But we'll talk about that nonsense in another video. But you get my point. You get the Manny Pacquiao Manny Pacquiao didn't have an opportunity to fight. However, if you look at the number between Canelo Alvarez and Errol Spence Jr., Errol Spence Jr. wins hands down. In this particular example, right, you have Errol Spence Jr., who fought in Texas during the pandemic, and Canelo Alvarez, who fought in Texas during the pandemic, and the revenue for their ticket sales came in. And both of them had the right to sell as many tickets as they wanted to sell. Canelo in Texas and Errol Spence Jr. in Texas. Errol Spence Jr. and Red did $2.6 million at the gate, and Canelo Alvarez did $2.3 million at the gate. That they both did more than Gervonta Davis did. So, as far as the gates for this year, Errol Spence Jr. won. If you look at the gates that happened last year, Errol Spence Jr. won those gates as well. In Texas, specifically, I'll point to the Mikey Garcia fight that took place the year before last that had over 50,000. Excuse me, it was the fight before last because he beat Sean Porter, right? Beat Mikey Garcia, then beat Sean Porter. Mikey Garcia, I do believe that he did what? 55,000, right? And he did 350,000 on a pay-per-view. Those are the other things, the pay-per-view. What is Canelo Alvarez bringing in revenue for people that are watching him? None. What this is the media is investing in Canelo Alvarez. Not the media. The networks are investing in him, right? Versus people necessarily supporting him. Now, I'm not saying that if Canelo Alvarez were to fight under the same circumstances as Errol Spence Jr., that his numbers would not be better. I don't know that, right? I don't know that. And quite honestly, when I go back and look at the other numbers that he did when he was fighting guys that were not major stars, he did numbers that were somewhat similar to what Errol Spence Jr. is doing now. The times where he broke over 1 million pay-per-views were against Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., which is whose name at the time was as big as Canelo Alvarez's was in the Mexican community. Not that people thought he was as good a fighter, but if you remember the promotion for that fight, it was very split down the middle about who people wanted to win. Did they want Canelo Alvarez to win, or did they want the son of Julio Cesar Chavez Sr. to win the fight? That generated about 1 million pay-per-views. About. The official numbers never came out. That was just Oscar De La Hoya saying, yeah, we did 1 million. Then the next fight that he did it on was, I do believe, he had 2 with Gennady Golovkin. And they are the ones that did 1.1, 1.2, right? At like $60, I think, or it might have been close to $100 for their pay-per-views, right? But that's with Gennady Golovkin in big major fights. But when you see that he has one against Erislandy Lara or somebody like that, it's down in the 300,000s, 320,000 range. I don't have that off the top of my head, but recalling what the big gates are in Vegas, you'll see Canelo down there further towards the bottom. Or if you look up and do the research on what his pay-per-view numbers are when he's fighting somebody that say would be the caliber of a Sean Porter, or somebody that does not have a tremendous backing behind them, you'll see what his numbers do. So, and I suspect that even if you look at the fights that are coming forward and you're saying, okay, what fights do people have that are going to generate the most interest in boxing, right? Now, if you're looking at it from a media perspective, these guys are always going to tell you that the people that are fighting on the top 10 pound for pound list of Ring Magazine or ESPN are the ones that are going to be the big fights. But if you're paying attention to the talk that's happening on the streets in boxing, where you're talking about, who really wants to see who fight, you get a lot different answers. Jamal Charlo, the big fight, there's two big fights available for Canelo. That is Errol Spence Jr. and Jamal Charlo. I don't think any other fight that he's fighting is going to be a tremendously big fight. Those are going to be fights that are subsidized by DAZN and have his name branded to the event so that they can attempt to get subscribers based off Canelo Alvarez's name. That is not a situation where they're going to sit there and they're really going to be generating revenue for something, right? They're going to be what you call a cost center, because that's what Canelo Alvarez is. Canelo Alvarez is not out there growing his brand. He's not out there trying to get new fans. He's there because of the success that he's already had and the fan base that they believe is already established that they want to bring into that app. That is something different than what Errol Spence Jr. and fighters like Deontay Wilder and guys in the PBC are doing, where they are actually going out and trying to really grow their names, right? Because they have to in order to sell tickets, right? And that's what you hear somebody like Terrence Crawford criticized a lot for, saying that, you don't do enough, you're not pushing, you're not really trying to sell any tickets. Well, if you look at Canelo and you look at Terrence Crawford, really, how is one any more significantly active than the other one, right? The only time that you hear from Canelo Alvarez is when Canelo Alvarez has a fight, right? And Canelo Alvarez only rarely even speaks in English when he's selling to American fight fans. The same thing is true of Terrence Crawford, with the grand exception that Terrence Crawford speaks English, right? And he's actually is in the, the boxing community on YouTube, going back and forth with people with his team. I would actually say that Terrence Crawford is more actively involved in growing his name than Canelo Alvarez. At least that's, from the actions that they put forward. But the difference being that, and again, this is why I'm saying that the bigger star is Errol Spence, because Errol Spence is not media grown. He is grown from the ground up. Canelo Alvarez was grown from the ground up, but he made it some years ago, man, and is now just a cost center, man. So if you're going to say who the star is, who's really out there shining, it's got to be the person that is out there doing the work, right? The person that's bringing in new fans, the person that's putting the most butts in the seat, the people that are bringing in the most revenue for the sales of their fights, right? Not the people that are sitting there just, off somebody's budget, man, with pretty much, the revenue already predetermined for the fight. But anyway, that's my take on the scenario. You let me know what you think. And with that, I'm out. Peace.